extra agendas in my box.
here?
That would have happened. I haven't heard Dan's not
Yes,
here,
okay.
so
He'll
we'll
be-
still have
he'll
four.
be here.
Yep. Oh, yeah, I put everybody else's in and I received it there. Thank you. I was a little off my game today.
This is pretty minor.
Oh, no, there were other things. I had to go back downstairs.
Are you wearing your, do you have one of those
Oh,
colors?
no, I don't do it. It would be. I'm a little resistant to extra electronics to have in my body all the time. I have
Oh, because you just go slowly, right. Yeah, pain will keep you away. April. 4 years. I want to see the see how many monuments we can recover. I think I know where they are. I found two. I know that. That's why I'm having a survey done. Yeah, no, I want the phone first. That's what's for. Let's find out what the real situation is. That's the. But it would be good. It'll preempt some occurrence.
I mean, I think that
Yeah. So anyway, so that's why I had my regs with me on Friday,
the lack
so I
of
could finish
any
up
requirement
everything.
for any type of
I have a coworker who jokes that
surveying
he assumes that
the town of Accounts. Like, if you think about like all the things that are required.
You
And
should
the
have.
fact that
That would be good to complete.
yes,
never actually been asked my dad.
It would be.
No, I like to, people ask me questions, let me make sure that I'm
I would agree. I think it's.
Yeah.
This is Wednesday, right?
human memory is powerful.
Was laid out in 1964 or 5, somewhere thereabouts.
And
And it's just like square, square, square.
when you're
Wow.
reading the
Yeah.
regs and
Easy.
if you see someplace
I
where you
mean,
think there should be an Oxford
those are
comma,
the
just send it to me.
gambles.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
especially after
you know,
the recent
25%
discussion I
of
had
the
with
time
some
you're
privacy
surveying every
attorneys,
single lot
where
in
some
Hampton
lack of
subdivision.
Oxford
You know,
comma.
prove that
It,
like,
it is in,
which are fun, but
I don't wanna get
Well,
into tit for tat
because
and that kind of
without
stuff. I just
the
want,
Oxford
let's
comma,
deal with the information,
the,
good information.
yeah.
And then,
modifier
so that's
and
how
they
it's,
only apply
that's
to
how.
the last item
I
on
found
the
that,
list
like,
versus all of the
we
items on
hardly
the
ever,
list.
like when there's a dispute and someone decides to get a survey,
Very problematic,
we come to the results.
potentially.
It doesn't go any further.
It's just
That's
like,
right.
You know,
Mike,
That, and that's
it's
why.
there.
give me a copy of
Okay,
the
well,
current markup so I can
this
go
is where
through
it's
the
at, like we
Oxford
can
comma
agree
and
something
choose.
different, but like let's.
I wanted to do it right in the very beginning, but,
Comma space and.
but
Yeah, and they're like,
convinced me, he said, well,
his
I
red
think
line
you'd
today
probably
of
be
the
okay.
one
I
who's
mean,
gonna be
you
sitting
need
to
to,
play,
didn't
so
you guys do it?
planning
I said,
position.
"Oh,
I'm like,
sure."
okay, let me go
Phone
through this one more
calls.
time.
And, we did, I took it on faith.
I'll hopefully be getting 367 River Street.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wanting to keep that round of
But
illness in my house, so.
for the entire time
My
that I owned that
productivity
property,
has
I
been-
will never have that issue.
Yeah, limited
It
the
used to
last
be that
few
survey
weeks.
lasts forever, but the way things are now.
Yeah. Well, it'll be reinforced in
The thing is,
1965.
the next meeting,
Work.
all we'll have is a sketch plan
But,
subdivision.
Yeah, we run into a lot of those.
No, next meeting.
We're done
Yeah, will it be a continuation?
with no angles,
This is sketch plan.
only dimensions,
yep,
and, like.
not
you know,
taking into account topography and
And it was also many times the surveyor involved, it was just, you know,
Just-
the engineer, they have.
oh, where it says square, let's put square here, put square here, yeah.
Lay out squares, but
Okay, so Brian's not gonna be here.
I haven't.
I think,
Brian
I think
hasn't
there was a
contacted
survey
me
done,
since
but
the baby was born.
I'll know more after the research.
And his appointment.
Yeah, because they're doing the research
So
before.
I just
Oh,
wasn't
that's
expecting.
good, that's
They're
good.
doing the
Yeah.
research before,
Yeah.
and then it was at my request to do the actual field work in April. Because I want to experience it, I want to see it.
On the street as
Right.
well?
I don't get,
Doesn't
I
look
don't get
too
that survey.
exhausted.
No, you look happy.
Yeah, maybe once every 25, 30 years.
She's supposed to
The,
swell
the city
about,
stuff,
he's been taking some parental leave.
how big is it, a couple of?
She's going to take.
No,
parental
it's,
leave
it's a,
come
It's a city lot.
it's a
after
point
the
four,
Lantern
point four
Festival.
acres.
She's a teacher at the elementary school.
She's, yeah,
It's
she's
not
our
huge
teacher.
at all,
Yeah.
but it sits upon top of
Very,
it still.
very
Yeah,
nice.
That's the view, it's the thing.
Blew my kid's mind first time she walked into our office.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was just at that
We were
right
just
point
like
in
four
time
of
where
us
they
to-
were like young enough to like,
Yeah, maybe we should.
what are you doing here, Mrs.
Go move over?
Well, I think
Debbie's
Debbie is
coming?
coming, Debbie is
As
coming.
close to 7 as you can, yeah.
Just might be a little late.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll maybe give it till 5 after or a little after that.
Did you know of, the attendees and absentees before today?
I knew about Tom, before today, and then I followed up with Will and Claire, and neither of them could make it. I chased them.
Do we have alternates in this one?
That's Will and Claire.
Will and Claire?
Will and Claire are the alternates.
Oh, right, okay. So,
Yeah.
I
So
don't know,
Tom
Dan,
emailed
if-
me last week.
Dan, I don't know if you want to make a reminder that it's important for
Yeah.
members to let their intentions be known as early as possible.
I
I think
would
Tom,
agree with that.
I think Tom did.
Tom was good about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom was good about it, and if Deb is here, just a little bit late.
Deb contacted me to convey
Then it's really just that slacker, Brian King.
Yeah, that's slack.
And of course, you know, the alternates fall under the, you have one job.
Although it is a Tuesday,
I
which is
understand.
not the normal
Yeah.
meeting day. I think Claire had a work meeting.
Well, unless there's an objection, maybe we should just get started, given the 3 applications before us tonight. Given some more people.
Speaking of,
Hello.
Hey.
We were just talking about you.
Saying nothing but good
phrase was
things,
that
though, of
slacker
course.
Ryan King.
So, yeah, I did not put your, I wasn't expecting you, so I didn't put your name tag up.
You know where it is?
I think it should be in your normal spot.
Yeah, but you can slip into Tom.
What is normal?
No idea.
I bet you don't.
this meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Richardson. I am the chair of the Montpelier Development Review Board, opening tonight's meeting for Tuesday, February 19th. The other members from my right are
Rob Goodwin.
Kevin O'Connell.
Meredith Crandall, staff. Kate McCarthy.
Ryan Kane.
good. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. Unless anyone has a change or a suggestion.
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Kevin, second by Rob. All those in favor of the agenda as printed, please raise your right hand. We have an agenda. There are no comments from the chair this evening. Next item of business is the approval of the February 4th minutes, and the people eligible are for myself, Kevin, Kate, and Rob. So we do have four. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Kate. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. All those in favor of the minutes as printed, please raise your right hand that are eligible to vote. You have minutes. All right. And with that, we can actually get to the substance of the meeting. The first item of business is 27 Court Street. If the applicant and any witnesses that are testifying. And what I'll do is I'll have you state your name for the record, and I'll put you under oath. Is there anyone else here this evening here to testify on 27 Court Street? Great. So if you could state your names for the record.
My name's Dan Clare. I'm Theo Fetter.
Okay. If you raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury? Very good. So, Meredith, why don't you give us an overview of this application, and then I'm going to let the applicants give their presentation.
Okay. So I'm going to keep this pretty brief. So this is a renovation plan. The big reason that it's here before the board is because part of the plan is partial, demolition of a portion of a contributing historic structure. So that bumped it up here immediately. It did also go through design review because it's in the design review district. And so you'll need to re-review that and look at the recommendations from the design review committee and confirm that those are all going to be included as conditions on any permit going forward. There are some minor site plan questions that came up during the review that most of them, I think, deal with facts that the applicant will need to address, such as coverage amounts and an issue with regard to exactly how far the corner of the porch on the rear of the building will be from the one of the side setbacks. But the big issue is really the demolition.
And just to be clear, the application is for demolition of a contributing
Yes.
structure, not the structure, not the main structure.
Correct. It's an addition and a shed that are attached to the back of the building that
Right.
were added on after the original building. And this, for members who have been part of this board for a while, this is a revisit with a changed plan for the renovation, plan, but that demolition of the rear portion was part of the old plan as well, the old permit.
Right, I was going to note that I think at least Kevin and I were here before. I don't know if you were here.
Yeah, I don't.
I didn't sit on that one.
Okay.
And
So it is a few years, it's been a few years.
3 years perhaps.
3 years. How time does fly. But obviously you're not bound by that earlier review, but I did remember that we had reviewed that, and I remember that there were some questions about the historic contributing nature of this portion of the building. And I presume that based on the application, that Dan is going to have some testimony to offer as to the contributing nature of this portion that you wish to demolish. With that, I'll give you the floor.
Describe the project?
Sure. Again, my name is Theo Fetter. I'm the owner of the property, and I've hired Clear Construction to design and build this renovation. The house was built in 1871 and has gone through many iterations over the last 140 some odd years. house since 2014, always with the intention of renovating it. Purchased the home because of its rather dilapidated condition in the first place, knowing that it would need some TLC relatively soon. I've lived in the home since 2014 until very recently in order to accommodate this renovation. The demolition would be of the shed and the addition that are not original to the house. We do not know the date they were built, but we suspect it was in the 1940s.
Is there, sorry,
Please.
is there a reason why you date it that, not that late, but that different of a time, if this is a sort of 19th century structure?
I'll let Dan speak to the lead on that. I don't
Okay.
have as professional of an opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly when this was built. We can tell it wasn't original. We can see there's some kind of ghost lines in the paint on that rear gable end, that clearly there was perhaps some other little shed back there at some point. The quality of the construction is markedly different than the quality of the construction of the original house. The original house is a well-built old house. The rear addition and shed is a very poorly built, addition and shed. And maybe some of it some of it is not finished space. The shed is certainly not finished space. The addition, maybe it was never finished space, and maybe someone in the 40s kind of attempted to, or at some point along the way attempted to kind of bring it into the house to increase the square footage of the house. The finishes in that space kind of scream, 1940s or something to that effect. Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt, I just was curious.
So the intention is to renovate the house to still be 3 residential units, 1 unit on each floor. The first floor going from a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom unit, and the second and third floors becoming 1-bedroom units. That's the scope of the project.
And so what's lost by the demolition? Is that it goes from a 3-bedroom on the first floor to a 2-bedroom. Is there any impact on the second or third floor?
It is an impact on the second floor. Currently, the second floor addition, which would be demolished, houses the kitchen.
Okay. So it's gonna accompany a sort of renovation within the apartment itself, then moving the kitchen forward?
Yeah, yeah. Over the last 4 years, as I've lived in the house and used the house, sometimes I've lived on each floor, so I've experienced the problems on each floor and the opportunities, and I've rented out each floor, of course. The second floor has been a 2-bedroom, with that kitchen being in the addition section, and so this would move that kitchen to where one of the bedrooms is currently.
Okay.
When you say the addition section, are you referring to the addition on the back? Because I note that there's also a little bit of a bump out on one of the sides.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I'm referring to the addition in the back. We had for some time assumed that the bump out, which is about 5 feet, and it is just on the first floor. Although the second floor addition matches that bump out that was on the first floor.
Okay.
We suspected for some time that that bump out was not original to the house. More recently, Dan's opinion is that it may well be that bump out on the first floor original to the house. And there's a couple of things to look at that I hadn't considered in the past that indicate it may be original.
Interesting. Thank you.
All right. So I'm looking at the drawings of the elevations. I just want to make sure I fully understand. And I'm looking at A3, and that seems to illustrate. So you've got the existing front porch of the house that's staying the same. And I'm looking at the existing east elevation on that drawing. And then you've got the main house building, I would say, and that's going to stay the same, except for, looks like you're replacing a door with a window and then it's in the back, really, that the demolition's occurring. And so is that entire section, in your opinion, Dan, newer to the house?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's a distinctively different quality than the
Absolutely.
main house?
From foundation to roof.
Okay, so it's not as if you're taking a part of the old house and deconstructing it?
No, the
Okay.
original house will be, would undergo the remodel, but that rear half is absolutely a different vintage.
Well, let's dive into some of the other issues. So, when that portion is taken out, you're then going to reside the back of the house and add that covered porch. Anything else?
Anything else as far as kind of what changes on that?
Exterior.
So new windows, siding,
Okay.
and the porch, yep, that is all.
And so I'm gonna jump to the provisions for the tear down, because I think that, before we talk about any of the setbacks or issues, I think we do have to take a look at the why am I not finding that?
Demolition, page 7.
There we go. Okay. Right. I just want to make sure we do the right findings that we have to, and because that seems like a threshold, because we don't get into any of the coverage issues unless we can make a sort of determination as to whether or not the standards have been met for the demolition. So to the extent we have questions about that, I'd like to go through the findings that we do need to make. And so, under section 3004, section D2 states that the demolition or replacement of any structure or portion thereof listed as a contributing structure to the Vermont Historic Sites and Structure Surveys and the National Register for Historic Resources is prohibited unless the Development Review Board approves the demolition and site restoration plan, and the board makes the following findings. A, rehabilitation of the structure or portion thereof would cause undue financial hardship to the owner. So if you could address that criteria, it hasn't necessarily, I mean, I understand that it's of a lesser quality than the main house,
Yeah.
that it looks like it was added on, but, I mean, that's true of a lot of old houses. What makes this cost prohibitive to renovate as it exists
Yeah.
currently today?
I would, in no particular order, the foundation, it's not on a quality foundation. The rest of the house has a real foundation under it. This back part of the house has, some rocks laid on the ground, and it's like, a little crawl space kind of scramble to get in there. So, I would say for starters, it needs a new foundation. The lot is very, very hemmed in. There is a significant ledge on the north side of the property that comes down right to the building, such that you can see over the years that north wall system has been, repaired and repaired again, and you can see it's just kind of undergone some pretty marginal quality repairs over the years, as kind of debris and leaves and things just kind of have found their way into that kind of acute angle there.
So would you call that a perpetual problem that is just always going to have either rock slides or
It's
leaves? Or
impossible to detail that properly in its current state, for sure. So one cannot access the foundation repair from any side other than the driveway side. And yet, one would need to get access all the way around to do a proper foundation repair.
What kind of foundation does it have?
It's like some rocks just kind of, placed there.
The original slab.
It's pretty minimal in its current state, which Theo's kind of shared some stories about various critters getting in there and wreaking havoc within the house.
I believe at least one picture was submitted that shows a shot within the shed, the foundation of which is just dirt.
On the story issue, I think you did a great job with the mating skunks.
I wish it weren't true. It was
Better than fiction.
It was I'm not far enough removed from that experience to think of it fondly.
I'll try to contain myself.
So to put a real foundation repair in there would require lifting the building significantly up in the air so that we could excavate properly, and we haven't that's an expensive proposition right out of the gates. And then the amount of structural repairs that would need to happen to the existing kind of structural components it really just kind of a significant portion of it just needs to be rebuilt. I'm certain that the sill all the way around the things that's sitting on those rocks is just completely shot, and that rear northerly wall is also just completely shot. So we start with the foundation, significant expense. Structural repairs, significant expense. It needs the siding is in incredibly poor condition, so new siding, new windows. I mean, the whole thing just really needs to be rebuilt, and then of course the interior finishes would need to be gutted. There's no insulation in anything over there. It's just a complete rebuild, to the point where, in my experience, it would be an unreasonable amount of money to capture an otherwise fairly small amount of square footage that would not contribute much to the way of marketability or income, revenue for that property.
I'm noticing in the staff report that these repairs have been estimated somewhere in the neighborhood between 165 and 185,000. Is that?
That was a study that I did, just kind of adding up all the things, and then probably some more that I just kind of rattled off there.
The known problems and the known unknowns.
Right. Yeah.
And then there was a supplementing letter that the deterioration of this particular area was not caused by your neglect, but just was inherent within the nature of this portion of the building. Is that?
I don't know that I specifically stated that in my letter. I did include a letter from Ward Joyce, who I purchased the house from, and he had been upfront with me that this portion of the house would have to be demolished at some point. That's a conversation I had with him at the point of sale. And I had asked him why, and he said, it's in really poor condition, it's not original to the house, it's not a good use of space. And he walked me through it, and we looked at the various issues, most of those being foundational. So I was aware that there were significant issues with it. And I cleaned up the garage, or not the garage, but the shed. It's a 2-story shed.
Right.
And used it sparsely for some storage over the last number of years, and fell out of favor of doing so because it felt dangerous to go up the stairs within the shed, and a number of times I put my foot through a hole in the shed and hit the dirt below. So I determined that it was not good for the purpose of which it currently is standing. That's the shed. The addition is been used as living space. It's the kitchen on the first floor and a bedroom on the first floor. And on the second floor is just a kitchen, sort of a dine-in area next to it. And as Dan was describing, the finishes on it were quite poor. When I had a blower door test done and had an energy audit of the home, those areas read as particularly leaky. Although there were many leaky spots throughout the rest of the house too, to be sure. But my hope was that area was newer and perhaps had some insulation, and that's not the case.
Right. But just so I understand, I mean, I can understand the shed portion seems to answer to all the issues, but then the addition to the house, is that have the same issues, Dan, with the lack of a foundation? Okay, so it's of a piece, even though it's a little bit more habitable.
Yeah, the condition of the foundation that I described was specifically for the addition.
Okay.
I actually haven't crawled far enough back in there to know if what's going on is for underneath the shed part. So the foundation conditions that I was describing were specifically for the addition.
Anyone else have any questions about historic preservation? I'll simply note that there's two standards. One is about undue financial hardship to the owner, and the other is the demolition is part of a site development plan and design plan that, if applicable, would provide clear and substantial benefit to the community. I presume you're going the first route, which is the undue financial burden, as opposed to presenting some community development plan, or.
I believe our project clearly qualifies for both.
Okay.
The benefit to the community being this blighted section of building being removed and creating parking spaces that don't currently exist on a very, very tight corridor in the city. I have a neighbor that is very optimistic and hopeful about there being more than 1.5 parking spaces on my property that my 3 units would avail themselves of, as that's been a challenge for him and his tenants to navigate as we share that space.
I have no doubt that that's a benefit to you. I just think that at least the second part, is when it talks about clear and substantial benefit to the community, raises a slightly higher standard than, I think that's true of any downtown property. If you tore down the backside of, the French Block, you'd have more parking spaces and fewer units that you needed to occupy with such parking spaces.
And it is an or in our determination.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think, I'm just trying to understand to make sure that we're doing the right analysis with the undue, because I think, I'm just one board member, but I think the undue financial hardship is something you've presented a great deal of evidence on, and more than sufficient. But I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything, or that there wasn't some other plan. Anybody else have any other questions? Meredith, sounds like you were going.
I think I was sort of going the other way, just because the actual the list of things to be considered for undue financial hardship under the current regs versus the 2011 regs is so extensive.
We do have, well,
Yeah.
actually.
But there's as long as there's not an and in there,
Right.
and so this is one of those things where it might require a little board interpretation, because I don't think we've dug into the financial hardship quite so much so far in demolition under these regs. And
Yeah.
because we're talking about an income producing.
Right, the
That's the
standard
focus.
for
the-
income producing is that the building site or object cannot be feasibly used or rented at a reasonable rate of return in its present condition, or if rehabilitated, and denial of the application would deprive the owner of all reasonable use of the property.
Yeah, and
Which is pretty-
that seems a much higher standard to me, and that's why I was going more in my analysis in here of sort of not just focusing on the benefits to the applicant, but the benefits to neighbors also. I mean, you're almost talking a public health issue if you're talking about pests and
Yeah,
Right.
I think so.
vermin and the safety of that rear structure. I don't know. You know, this is just my staff
Yeah.
thought process. But that's why I didn't
So
go into
we-
the full financial analysis in here, because it seemed that we did not necessarily, couldn't necessarily get enough data.
Well, what is the current value of the property on the grand list?
$219,500, which was the sale price of the
It's maintained its,
part.
it's maintained its value on the grand. Kidding.
Apparently.
I mean, that in and of itself is, and you bought it how many years ago?
4 years, 5 years in April.
So Dan, the $165,000 to $185,000 estimate is to remove it.
No.
No,
to
that was,
rehabilitate it,
okay.
yeah. That's the new foundation, the structural repairs, the siding, the roofing, the whole thing.
Maintain just the addition or the addition and the shed?
The latter, the addition, yeah.
Do you have any sense of how removal of that, or how rehabilitation of the structure would affect the value of the property? I mean, you're not adding any actual square footage above now, you're essentially just making what exists safe.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that. I'm not sure.
Theo, as owner of the property, do you have any sense of whether you think that it would greatly increase the value of the property to rehabilitate as opposed to
From a granular
demolish?
standpoint or from a marketability standpoint, maybe two different questions. From a granular standpoint, I'm not sure it does. I could say in the eyes of a lender, as it doesn't add square footage, the argument that it adds value is limited to rehabilitate that space. But from a marketability standpoint, certainly those units are more attractive if they're fresh and that space can be used without the current issues that you face in using those spaces, particularly the vermin. It's a problem that I've never been able to stop or, lessen in any way. I grew up in New York City, and I joke with my family and friends back there that they don't know what mice problems are like until they've lived my house on Court Street.
No, I think that does. And so, I mean, one thing is if you increase the number of off-street parking spaces, it would theoretically increase the value of the property.
Theoretically, it's also, smaller square footage for the units.
Right, but I mean,
But the off-street parking lure maybe make it more marketable, especially in a town that has had so many, winter parking bans this year.
I would say that I've definitely encountered tenants, prospective tenants, for whom that was a top-level concern, as it is for me.
I mean, I'm looking at the standards for determination, and one thing that the statute doesn't, bylaws don't say is that the applicant has to hit each and every single standard squarely. And I'll just note that, the first one talks about the applicant's knowledge of the property's historical significance at the time of acquisition or of its status subsequent to acquisition. And I think the applicants met that burden by showing that subsequent to its acquisition, or, at the time of acquisition, he knew this was a portion that needed to be torn down, or that was in rough condition, as opposed to the other portions of the house. And that this was always, had different historical significance. The second talks about the structural soundness of the building, and I think we've heard a lot about that, and their suitability for rehabilitation. And both of those do not seem like a workable solution here. C talks about the economic feasibility of rehabilitation or reuse of the existing property in the case of proposed demolition. As Ryan pointed out, we're talking about a demolition that's close to equal the entire value of the property. With a end result of, if the renovation was done, the value of the property would not double, because we're just talking about a small portion in the back. And then it talks about the current level of economic return on the property is considered in relation to the following: the amount paid for the property, the date of purchase, a substantial decrease in the fair market value of the property as a result of the denial of the permit, fair market value of the property at the time the application is filed, real estate tax of previous 3 years, annual gross and net income from the property, remaining balance on any mortgages or financing secured by the property, and all appraisals obtained within the previous 3 years, and any state or federal income tax returns. I think these are all things that possibly could be considered or used by an applicant to raise a financial viability issue where the other factors aren't there. I don't necessarily see a reason to go deeply into those. I mean, what it seems, if I'm understanding the testimony correctly, it's that your property hasn't decreased in value, and if this demolition is denied, it's not that you'll be denied the right. It will not be decreasing in value, but it will just simply hold at this sort of consistent level. It's of a particular type of quality, and what you're proposing is essentially to rehabilitate and renovate, and there's some evidence that that would increase the value. With off-street parking, better fixtures, I mean, would have a modern kitchen, at least in 2 of the apartments. And so then subsection E talks about the marketability of the property for sale or lease considered in relation to any listing of the property for sale or lease. Again, this is not something that you've attempted to do to market or sell or lease the property. F talks about the feasibility of alternative uses that can earn a reasonable economic return. It's not, the key here isn't that the economic return is such, you're affording the apartment, you're continuing to be able to live in it. It's just, you've now built up a certain amount of money to invest in the property, and presumably once these renovations are done, it's a tighter, more efficient house, and those payments pay off over time, and then your rate of return increases, right, at the end of the day.
I think perhaps related to this is we might conclude that if you spent the money to rehabilitate the additions on the back, you would not be able to charge rents that would allow you to pay back whatever you borrowed. You would not be able to achieve a reasonable rate of return to cover the costs of the rehabilitation of the rear.
Agreed. And this rear section is not it's not an acute problem. It's not as if it's falling down right now today, but what your testimony is also that it's on its way. It's a perpetual problem. It's not getting any better.
For a while. It's been on its way for a while. Certainly at the time I purchased the house, it was clear that it was on its way.
It's a slow walk towards.
We don't want to let it get there, especially not in that location in the city.
So again, studies and evaluations, I don't think are relevant here. Input from community organizations, preservation groups, other associations, or any private citizen who may wish to evaluate and comment on a submission made under a financial hardship provision. Again, is there anyone here who's here to testify about this renovation project?
I will say that my time spent serving on the DRC with Eric Gilbertson taught me that if someone was definitely going to flag concerns about the demolition of any historic structure in this town, it's my friend Eric. And I was curious how he would review this project the second time, and I was pleased that he focused on aspects of the exterior of the renovation of the original house, and was quite quick to dismiss any potential concerns about demolishing the shed and addition.
That's just because you never met Margot George.
I don't know them all.
Well, God rest her soul. But she makes Eric look like a pushover.
That's an accomplishment.
Yes. So when we talk about the determination of undue financial hardship, which, I mean, and I'm pushing the board to go in this direction. I'm not hearing a lot of pushback, I just think that the community benefit, I mean, obviously, any property that's cleaned up has some community benefit, but I think that's just, it talks about clear and substantial. And it talks about community as opposed to neighborhood or property, which suggests something larger than the property itself. And so I think we fall under this undue financial hardship. And so, you know, the determination of undue financial hardship may be granted only if the project fully complies with one of the following requirements. So this is income producing property. The building site or object cannot be feasibly used or rented at a reasonable rate of return in its present condition, or if rehabilitated, and denial of the application would deprive the owner of all reasonable use of the property. The way I would read this particular provision is that the building or site, you know, cannot be feasibly used or rented at a reasonable rate of return in its present condition, or if rehabilitated, which is Kate's point, that you would never even come close to capturing the amount of money that's necessary to rehabilitate the existing structure on the back. And you really are faced with a situation where do you either tear it down, I mean, do you either let it continue to rot and maybe let that rot transmit to the main part of the house, or make the business unfeasible because of frost issues, foundation issues, structural issues that your expert is testifying to. And I think that, in that respect, the denial of the application would basically deprive you, ultimately, of the reasonable use of the property, because you're faced then with the situation of either letting this rot into the earth, or to pour ungodly amounts of money into a fairly minor portion of the property. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's not forget the health effects of the
Right.
no action option.
Right, and I think that's where the pest and vermin really do impact the quality of life inside the residence of the house. So while, yes, it's better not to have, pests and vermin are gonna, I mean, you know, look, they're gonna scurry back up the cliff and hide out. They're not gonna go away.
They'll just wait another decade or two and come back down.
Exactly, but they're not gonna, but I think it will have a huge impact on the quality of life. I say that having renovated my house and listening to the mice who have gotten up into the,
We've all been there.
yeah.
I agree with the chair's approach to talk about this in terms of the financial hardship test rather than the clear and substantial benefit to community test. I think that's important for us to do in terms of setting up how we think about future demolition applications. I do note that in our new zoning regulations, and this is the first time I've used them for demolition review, we have a much higher standard for financial hardship than we did before. I think on balance, we have met that standard. And I hope that we can continue talking about those standards and whether they're gonna help us achieve our goals.
But in the old ordinance, they didn't even mention financial, undue hardship, is my recollection.
Mentioned economic feasibility, I think.
Yeah.
And
There was a
it was
provision.
squishy. Or,
Yeah.
I don't have it here, so I can't argue the point.
sort of have it here. But I do know that this is much, much clearer. The all reasonable use of the property standard is extremely high. I think on balance, we can probably make a determination in that area, but I would maybe, let's keep an eye on that in the future too.
Yeah, agreed. I appreciate the chair's approach on that as well, because the factors for consideration under 3, if really all you're talking about is this high standard of deprivation of all reasonable use of the property, then why did the regulations have, 8 considerations that we're supposed to do if it's really as simple as, do you have any reasonable use of the property or not? I mean, so I think you have to read those into 4A and look at it in this more holistic approach that we're adopting here. I also think it's not clear in here, but I think we do have to consider the value of what's being demolished. Because I think if this were the main part of the building, it could certainly be the case where it's, the cost of rehabilitation is exceptionally high and may not be easily recaptured through rents. And yet I still think in situations that economic hardship alone should not be sufficient to demolish a historic building. Here, and this is why I personally think that it would meet either test. Here, you're talking about removing a later addition that was poorly built. You could make the argument that that would actually enhance the actual historic part of the structure, which would be a substantial community benefit, in addition to the parking, in addition to removing an unsafe situation that was not created by this applicant. So I don't know. I'm comfortable doing either, but I do think that that the approach we're taking here could be read to, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with the economic hardship analysis if we were talking about the historic portion of the building, like the front section of the building.
Yeah.
If you could just say, there's no way I could recapture this through current rent rates, the cost of rehabilitation, that's a different analysis.
I think there's 2 things embedded in that observation, which I would agree with, and one of which is, there is a balancing, the difference between a shed that was kind of tacked on and expanded sometime in the early 20th century or mid-20th century versus the original historic structure itself, as well as I think there's and it's not called out explicitly, but I would argue that there is at least an implicit understanding about good faith and bad faith in maintaining the property. And I've been around long enough to have seen these regulations come into play in Montpelier, which didn't exist. And in part, they were done for the purpose that there were a number of historic buildings where the owner would just simply wait until the property rotted into the ground and rehabilitation was no longer feasible. And I don't have the sense that this is, from the testimony, that this is the case here. All right, so I think unless Rob, you want to chime in? Which you don't have to, I'm not asking. So let's move back then. So when we talk about the rear setback, which I think is the next question. So my sense here is, at least the weather report, is that we all seem to be in agreement about the the demolition, that it meets these standards that have been set out. But when we talk about the rear porch, now goes into about 5 feet into the setback area. And the Meredith, we're talking about, this is essentially a waiver, right, for the setback?
Yeah. So the problem is that what the waiver allowance is for the porch, sorry, I think sorry, I don't have that right in front of me at the second. I think the max waiver is 5 feet.
Yeah, that's how much it's supposed to be. The new rear porch is closer than,
Right, that's what I'm saying, the allowed is 5 feet
okay.
from
Or when we're talking about the porch, are we referring to the item labeled deck on drawing A 1.0?
Yeah,
proposed first
it-
floor plan.
Yep, so it's labeled deck
Okay.
on the elevations, and the floor plan. It's just that, in our regulations, my understanding is that a deck cannot be covered. Once it's covered, it's a porch.
Okay, all right.
I guess I have a question, the fact that it's inside the footprint of the existing building, how does that,
It's unclear. There isn't, that's so, yes, it's inside the existing footprint. However, it is a new structure being added. You know what I mean? So it's not like the porch is technically a nonconformity.
Okay.
Right? Because the nonconformity, you can allow something that's currently there to remain there, but once you remove that completely on your own and it hasn't fallen down by itself, you can't rebuild it.
But if you were proposing to rebuild, to tear down, put a new foundation in and rebuild the same addition just such that it wasn't falling down, that would be a permitted
Well, you would,
rebuild.
right, you wouldn't be rebuilding it from scratch. You would be, right, you wouldn't rebuild, you'd be rehabilitating. You wouldn't completely tear down the addition piece by piece and take all the sticks apart. You were talking about lifting it up to put the foundation in.
I think that's a catch-22, because I wouldn't do either one, but,
If you
but
were,
yes, the scenario,
typically,
yes.
if you were gonna put a foundation under something, you don't take it all apart and then put it all back together.
That's the scenario we were talking about, yes.
Has the applicant filed a written request for a waiver for this dimensional requirement?
They haven't filed a written request for the waiver because the analysis that they would actually need a waiver was, on my part, was a little too late for that. So no, it'd be oral. I tried to put as much in here as I could.
Okay. So, just so we understand, and is this on the east side that where the 5 feet non-conforming?
It's the
Western,
Western elevation?
yep, so it's the western elevation.
Okay.
So if you look at the site,
Yeah.
the site plan, yeah, if you look at the site plan, that's really the best view, so that's on A1.0, the proposed site plan.
But it's just the portion of the porch that sits behind that little bump out that's already
Right.
existing.
Right,
So,
so they're not extending the line of the house
Right.
closer to the setback, it's flush.
okay. In that respect, then, okay. Standards.
Right, so you have, you have
Yeah, I'm
the issue
looking.
with the accessory structures in figure 3-07, in that, porches, even if this counted as a deck,
Is it 3 or
Min-
2-07?
it's, sorry, so it's on page 3-8, so it's figure 3-07, under section 3003.
Yep.
So even as a deck, your minimum allowed rear or side setback is still 5 feet.
Okay.
And for a waiver of a side setback, your maximum waiver limit is not less than 5 feet. There's just no, at least administratively on my part, I see no way to they don't allow something closer than 5 feet from the side
Right.
setback, from the property line, side property line.
So if I could just restate that to make sure I understand it, when you say the maximum is 5 feet, you mean that any waiver cannot let something get closer
Closer.
than 5
Right.
feet to the property line?
Right. That's the way I read
It
this.
does not mean that we're talking about 5 feet here or 5 feet there.
Right.
Okay.
And this is just for waiver as opposed to a variance.
Right, but a variance would be based on the physical nature of the property and having no, I believe it's reasonable use of the property.
We've done some creative analysis in the past.
My understanding is that was under the old regulations where you didn't have specific waivers.
I
Yeah,
don't
but
think-
the variance was, I mean, that's set by statute. So, okay. So the question is, I mean, so the actual portion of the house is already existing. That's not seeking the waiver. The question is, does this small 5 feet by, how deep is the porch?
5'6".
Okay, so really 5 feet by 5 feet, 25 square feet.
Actually, a little less than that because we are some amount back from the property line there. So really, it's probably more like 5 feet by 3 feet that we're talking about
Okay.
in that area.
You're talking, sorry, Dan, are you talking about the total size of the entire structure?
Well, no,
The
just
depth?
the
portion that
what
would
we're
be-
focused on with the waiver, which is the, I want to make sure that we isolate what we're not looking at, which would be the building, and then the portion of the porch. The only portion of the porch that we're really talking about is this little
15 square feet.
15 square feet. Okay,
So it's only a 3-foot issue?
We're 2 feet away from the property line.
Thank you.
Okay.
so,
So
So,
go ahead.
is that approximate or is that an unknown fixed line?
That is approximate.
Okay.
It's
No less than 2 feet, or,
It is, it is no plus or minus 2 feet.
okay.
It's essentially based on what we found from the city, and then my repeated conversations with the neighbor, Steve Rivellini, that we both understand it to be the property line being at the center of the tree, that is, we've always understood to be the point in which my property becomes his property.
And we
I'm not
went
sure.
through, I forget the word I'm looking for, but we went through records and plotted the property, plotted the property corners based on those, archived
Right.
those records.
I mean, to me, this is still, there's a pre-existing non-conforming structure there now that's gonna be removed and replaced with a much smaller enclosed porch. The whole approval of this will decrease the level of nonconformity. And as such, I don't even know that we need to grant a waiver. Also, I'm looking at the nonconformity section, 1203E provides that a nonconforming structure may be enlarged or expanded without waiver or variance, provided the addition does not encroach beyond the existing nonconforming building line, which this deck would not with regard to that side yard setback. So I'm not inclined to worry about granting a
Yeah.
waiver or anything else, and as one board member, I'm happy to approve this without, as presented, without any of these other hoops that we might try to jump through, and certainly without requiring them to cut off 3 feet of deck to tuck it back in from the existing property line.
Right.
I have a hard time viewing it as an existing nonconformity because it doesn't exist. The porch, it does not exist.
Wait,
But-
but the house does.
The-
So is
So are
is
you
the
building
porch
on-
an extension of the non-conforming house?
Even a new
Is what I think
structure,
he's
you can
talking about.
expand onto a nonconformity so long as the addition does not encroach beyond the existing nonconforming building line.
Okay, thank you. So you're building off the nonconformity that is the house.
Correct.
Thank you for
Yep.
clarifying that.
I missed that one.
That makes sense.
Well, that's much easier.
Well, I think we're right around the right track. I think it's important for us to explore these
Yep.
new aspects of the new ordinance, but I don't know if we need to carry that through and complicate matters.
Nope. I'm perfectly happy substituting Ryan's analysis for this whole waiver, because I think, you know, a part of what I was wrestling with was that I think the waiver makes sense as Kate was starting to suggest, when you have a completely new structure.
Yes.
And we can waive some of the setbacks, but only so far, because that's when you have total control over where you're planning to situate this. Whereas here, we're talking about the extension of a non-conforming structure, which is just the classic problem we've always dealt with. This is board, where we have a garage that sits on the boundary line that somebody wants to build a second floor to, or, you know, continue to have a reasonable use of it. All right, well, let's move on.
Sorry
So-
to have complicated that one.
No, this is how we learn. Apologize to everyone sitting here as we stumble through some of these newer provisions.
Yeah, so then you have the coverage, which
Okay.
I believe, I'm hoping applicants have some new data for, so we should get the new data from
Can I-
them, the
can I
exact
pass this around?
measurements,
Yes.
please.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, Dan, if you just want to, for the record, go through
Sure.
this.
So I took Meredith's template, which I appreciated it being organized as it was in this document, in the staff prepared document, and dialed in the numbers so that they were more accurate. So we've calculated that the total square footage of the lot is that top number, 4,687. When we combine the footprint of the house and all area that consists of the driveway, the front walkway, and all parking areas, total 2,860 square feet. Based on the 4,678 square feet of the parcel, 70% of that would be, 70%, which is my understanding of what we're allowed to kind of take up with, is 3,275 square feet. We are proposing, oh, I'm sorry, there's a typo in there, isn't it? Yep, that second number, that line down towards the bottom, that's supposed to be 2,860 to be consistent with that upper number.
Right.
At 2,860 square feet, I believe we're within the allowable percentage
Great.
of coverage.
The building footprint includes the front porch?
It's the existing front porch.
Yes, existing front porch.
I don't believe I did include that front porch with and if that's an error, I mean, I guess
It's probably
perhaps it
less
should.
than
I guess
300
in my
square
mind,
feet.
it was a little, maybe that was unclear. But I still think I'm confident that even if we were to include that front porch, we would still be within, that 70%.
Because the front porch is probably less than 30 feet long and less than 10 feet deep, right?
It is absolutely less than those numbers that you just said, yes.
Yeah. Because that's what you basically are working with, is 300, right? 300 or 400 extras. Okay, that answers my,
415.
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
So
Thanks.
I think we can, at this point, move on to the DRC comments. And the DRC found this by a vote of 5-0 to be acceptable. But they had, it looks like, approximately 4 recommendations that they recommended one of 4 options for the front south-facing door.
Oh, right, yeah.
And were those out of 4 options that were presented to them for the front?
Those were the 4 options that the DRC provided to the applicants is what was acceptable to the DRC.
Oh, okay.
Because the applicants were going to just replace the front door.
Okay.
And so the DRC had some specifics with what they would like to see that actually replaced
Oh,
with.
okay, I see, sorry. So one is the repair or reconstruct the existing double doors. The other is to repair or reconstruct and attach existing double doors so they function as a single door. The third was to replace the front double doors with a new single 42-inch door with an appearance and profile which matches design of the existing double doors. And 4, to replace the existing double with new in kind. Recommend not changing the single window on the south face of the attic level. Alternative, single window on the south face of the attic, sorry.
It's also,
Oh, do you have a type? Oh,
yeah, I have it all typed up so it's easier to read.
absolutely gibberish to me.
You're trying to read Steve's handwriting.
I am trying to read Steve's handwriting. Okay, so not changing the single window on the south face of the attic level. The alternative recommended is to add either A, an additional skylight on the east or west side of the roof, or B, increase the size of the existing skylight with either a fixed or operable skylight. And then I think the third was raising roof support brace for the rear porch to allow headroom for accessibility. Now, were you acceptable to all those changes? Have you made a decision on the front south-facing door?
Number 3.
Number 3, which is replace the front double door with a single 42-inch door with an appearance and profile which matches the design of the existing double doors.
Just-
Okay.
Can I just ask a question out of curiosity? Were you able to, was the gentleman that was recommended to you to build that?
No,
No.
that wasn't relevant to me because we do that. So
Okay.
we
Oh,
will
great,
build
yeah,
that.
so but it made sense to build it yourselves, cool,
Yes.
that's awesome.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a clarifying question on one of the design review committee's recommendations, and that's number 2 about the single window on the south face of the attic level. It says that alternatives could, that it recommends skylights as alternatives, and was it your sense from the DRC that that was optional, that you would not be required to put in a skylight?
They were just thinking with us about, since they
If you
kind
wanted more
of
light.
take it the way, they were trying to
Okay,
add back in, should it
Okay.
be desirable.
okay, because I wouldn't want you to be required to put in a skylight.
There will be no additional skylights.
All right, thank you. I mean, it makes no difference
Probably
to
the
me, I just want you to have a
Best
choice.
decision you'll ever make with a house in Vermont.
Holes and roofs. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and then the roof support brace, raising that, is that something that you're you're amenable to? Doesn't cause radical changes?
No.
Okay. Great.
And then there was the last thing that came up is during design review was that it was determined that there will be new lights on the back, so lighting is discussed further on in here, to
Right.
get some details on that, but the DRC was happy with giving the applicant options for either a recessed light in the ceiling of the porch or something on like a wall sconce back there. Either one was fine, especially because it's on the back of the building.
Right. Okay. Any questions, rest of the board, about those? On the demolition. One staff comment is about erosion control. Where the project doesn't disturb an area greater than 10,000 square feet, so no erosion control plan is required, but the staff recommends that the board include a condition of approval requiring the applicant to follow erosion control practices as outlined in our bylaws.
Yep.
Is that a condition that's acceptable to you?
Absolutely.
I think it is important in this respect, because obviously, as the melt comes and as the work starts and the demolition off of the cliff, there may be some issues. And I know, having walked down Court Street, the way water flows off of the properties does have a direct impact onto those streets. Okay, and then Department of Public Works reviewed the application and indicated no concerns regarding the plans as presented. We have a requirement to determine whether the project complies with stormwater management. This is hooked up to, there are storm sewers and other drainage improvements that are there's no drainage or stormwater improvements that are being proposed in this project, right?
That's correct.
Okay, but this is a property that's served already by storm sewers along the street, on a relatively small lot.
The street is served by storm drains.
Right. All right, so the question is, do we find that complies with 3009 for stormwater, given that the Director of Public Works finds it in no issues?
We do.
Good. All right.
Sorry, guys, just sort of a technicality.
No, so, one thing that I did not see, and I'm happy to understand if I missed it, you've talked about adding parking spaces along the back there. Is that part of this application now? Have you outlined?
It's in
Oh,
the
sorry.
site plan.
I missed that.
That shows, so that's all detailed, that's why it all seems to comply.
Okay.
So I put that all in here, but there's no red because
Oh, I see
I
the
didn't find
parking.
any
Okay.
issues.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I missed. Okay, so parking 1, 2, and 3, you've got the snow storage area marked, approximate line of the ledge. Great. Any questions from the board? All right. So we find that the parking conforms to the requirements. They're past the front line of the building, the use is residential, so the 1 per unit standard is met. This is a minor site plan. One question that we do ask people, however, is bicycle access and circulation. Is there a spot for bicycle storage planned for the property?
Yes, and,
Okay.
and hopefully, we could use the full length of the porch in between the back porch, in between the door and the end of the porch, because my bicycle will fit by 6 inches with the plans as they are.
Okay, well, with that extra 15 feet you got.
Good thing we didn't
So,
reduce the
yeah.
porch.
I mean. Okay,
The front porch could also be used for bicycle storage, but more likely the back porch.
all right, so, no landscaping is proposed. And I'm skipping over most of the other pieces that are largely acceptable, such as sidewalks, pedestrian circulation, as an in-city lot. So, we're still working with 3203G landscaping?
Yes, we're still working with it.
Huh.
Trust me, I'll let you guys know as soon as, if hopefully City Council approves the interim adoption of a new landscaping provision.
So this is a new provision. And it talks about site landscaping. It requires 1 shrub for every 5 feet of building perimeter and 1 tree for every 30 feet of exterior, principal building exterior. And so Meredith has done some calculations based on the scale. Not including the barn or storage area is approximately 168 feet. So, wait a minute, 33.6 shrubs and 5.6 trees.
If we got down to it, I was gonna let you guys decide if you were gonna round those up or not. Sorry.
Round it up.
We might as well round them up before
Oh,
we
no.
ignore them.
Round them up to 0.
I want 6/10 of a shrub and 6/10 of a tree. So you haven't proposed, do you have any rough count as to what's existing on your property as far as trees and shrubs go?
Yes.
Okay,
There is 1 large tree in the front. There are approximately 50 small trees in the back that are all on the slope, that are on my property.
all the little volunteers growing up in the crevices and cracks.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know that we have a definition of shrub in our bylaw, but do I remember correctly that there is extensive landscaping in the front in the form of Are they lilies, black-eyed Susans, or both?
This house is somewhat well-known for its rather wild flower,
I like it, that was a compliment.
putting the wild in the wildflower front yard.
Yeah.
So perennials,
Yes.
Yep.
large number of perennials.
Mhm.
You know,
Great.
one of the ways we've gotten to work with this landscaping and screening is that it talks about the purpose. And I'll just simply read this. I think it's important, although we have, as a board, heard it many times. Oh, you got it.
In brief, it's there. Trust me,
Yeah.
I keep putting that in every time we have to go through this
So
landscaping
the
provision.
purpose of this section is to protect the quality of life and community character by, one, enhancing the appearance of the built environment as viewed from public vantage points, creating shade along sidewalks and walkways within parking lots, providing landscape buffers between residential and non-residential land uses, and screening land uses and development that create visual clutter and distraction. And, you know, one purpose that's stated in sort of the longer definition is that this is not meant to hide houses or developments. It's not to create like the cedar screen that your neighbors down the street used to have. It's intended to enhance and to soften. And so, is there room in the front yard for another tree, or would that crowd your existing tree and gardens?
There is room for several more small trees in the front yard.
Okay.
Or one larger tree.
But actually, trees aren't the issue because you have the 50 in back, right?
Yes, that's my count.
Okay.
I'm,
I mean, you only have to get to 5.6, so,
yeah, I think I'm splitting hairs between what is a tree and what is a twig, or on its way to being a full tree, on some of those, but.
I mean, I'm just looking, and again, this is, I think, what we're trying to do, and we're not trying to play games necessarily, but we're trying to this section here really talks about the, enhancing this appearance and generally landscaping should be designed to fit into and enhance the site's natural features and setting. Landscape plans that feature a mix of plant materials arranged in informally shaped and spaced groupings are strongly encouraged. So I mean, what you're saying is you have a tree in the front yard, you have extensive perennial gardens in the front yard. In the back, you have more wild growth, picturesque as it would be.
They have leaves.
And they have leaves, and they have, but they grow, they only grow to a certain size, and then the rocky soil limits them. Okay, any questions from anyone?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, we're trying to meet the intent of creating an improved environment
Yeah.
type of situation through landscaping. And perhaps we could approach this a somewhat different way, which would be to say that the applicant has provided evidence of existing landscape which meets the intent of the ordinance, and that the board is approving the application with the existing landscaping, and no further landscaping is necessary. And we can create that as a waiver if necessary, or some other, it's also a way to add a level of practicality to an ongoing discussion.
Right. No, I think, and I think that's well phrased, Kevin. And I think that's where I'm edging towards, so succinctly put.
That's fine with me.
Good. All right, so let's move on. When we talk about outdoor lighting, which is what we started to talk about earlier, is there a proposal for your outdoor lighting?
We don't have light fixtures specified, but would be more than happy to comply with the standards that are presented here.
Okay. So,
really
if
the-
there were, go ahead.
So really, the lumen and the Energy Star
Yep.
requirements.
Understood. Yep.
Fully shielded,
Pardon?
the lights will be fully shielded,
Oh,
is that,
if that's a required, oh, right, yep. Yes.
Okay. I mean, one thing is that where it's situated underneath a porch roof may affect how it's shielded,
Yeah.
right? So as I understand the DRC's concern or allowance was either recessed lighting or a sconce, and you're comfortable with that? Under the porch roof, okay. All right, so a condition that they comply with the Energy Star shielding and lumen requirements is acceptable. All right. I don't know if I have any more questions. I can always create more. But we have a couple of different things. So we've got minor site plan review, which we've conducted, design review, which we've conducted, demolition of a contributing structure review. So there's 3 of those. I would propose we make 3 separate motions. And I would suggest we start with the demolition of the contributing structure. So who wants to make the motion?
I'll move that we approve the demolition of a portion of a contributing structure as presented in the application.
Okay, motion by Ryan. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Rob. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Okay. I'll take a motion about design review that would incorporate the conditions that the applicant has said they're amenable to.
Mr. Chair, I'd move design review approval at 27 Court Street with the following conditions. The applicant shall choose from one of the following options regarding the front south-facing door. Is it necessary to list them?
No.
As recommended by the design review committee. The next condition is that the applicant shall leave a single window on the south elevation of the 3rd floor. Instead of the proposed additional small windows, the applicant may add a second skylight on the roof on the east or west side, or increase the size of the existing skylight. The next condition is that the applicant shall raise the bottom connection location of the rear porch roof support to allow headroom underneath for accessibility. And as well as the last condition pertaining to outdoor lighting as recommended by the design review committee.
Motion by Kate. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Kevin. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. All right, and minor site plan review. And I think we'll have to include the conditions in regards to the erosion control.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the application for minor site plan approval with the condition that the applicant shall follow the erosion control practices outlined in section 3008B of the regulations.
Okay.
That is the only condition.
Second.
Motion by Ryan, second by Kevin. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. All right, you have preliminary approval, and just so you know, that of course is subject to the 30-day window once the decision issues in its written form. But you have nothing more for us tonight unless you wish anything else.
Yeah. Thank you all for your
Yeah.
thoughtful consideration.
Thank you for your
Thank you for your
patience.
patience.
Mr. Chair, may I request a 2-minute break?
All right, let's take a quick 2-minute break, but if the second applicants of the evening want to come forward and get set up. It's okay. It's okay. All right. I think this is the next two, pretty much. Yep. Yep. No, I think they can. They can move through much faster. Okay. All right, ready to go back on? All right, thank you all very much. We're back on the record here at the Development Review Board. Sir, if you'll introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Samuel Nuara.
Okay, Mr. Nuara, we're going to do sketch plan review, so just so you understand, we're not going to put you under oath. This is really an initial opportunity for us to ask questions, for you to present your subdivision plans. Nothing we don't determine anything that's binding tonight. It's an opportunity for us to raise questions or issues that we think you may have to address going forward, and to get a general sense of your application, so that when you do the final subdivision, you have the benefit of this opportunity to have sort of vetted through some of these issues. Is anyone else here to be heard on this particular application, sketch plan review?
I don't know that I'm here to be heard, but I'm here
Okay.
to listen.
So just, if you could indicate to me if you have any feedback. It's a very informal process, but I would ask you to step up to the microphone when you do, if you do want to speak. I mean, if you're here to just simply listen, that's fine as well. Obviously, as I said, nothing tonight is decided. It's just simply an opportunity to listen or hear. But if part of what you're hearing has a concern for you, or you think needs to be addressed, one, you can raise it to the board tonight, to put it on our radar, to the extent that our bylaws would consider it. But two, it's always a good opportunity then, if you have a concern that you think the applicant can meet by making alterations or changes, to start that conversation. So I'll simply put that out there as a way of trying to help foster a successful application process. So Meredith, do you want to give us just a quick overview?
Sketch plan in general?
No, of this
application?
particular
Yeah, just wanted to
application.
make sure. So this is a fairly basic, to me, 2-lot subdivision of a residential parcel, such that the new parcel won't have any structures on it. All of the current structures will remain on, the initial lot. There's a few factual matters that I've highlighted in here that the applicant needs to clarify. Some of them are minor, like whether or not, utilities will be underground. One of the biggest items, I think, for the applicant to get feedback from you on is whether or not you have any thoughts about driveway possibilities. The current, they've included a potential, house and driveway in here just to show that it's doable, that it can meet the, a zoning permit requirement later on. And the potential space for a driveway is pretty small. It meets the requirements. That was one of Department of Public Works issues too, just because it's a small parcel. But in general, there's not major issues that I have seen. A few notes for final subdivision application and things to include or things not to include, such as the house outline.
One question along those lines, as I'm looking at the sketch in back, the blue dotted lines, is that the building envelope? There's like a red highlighted that looks like the boundary. There's a footprint of a proposed house,
Full application.
but then,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you actually do.
I think those are the setback lines.
Okay.
The note that says that they're the setbacks.
Not on this.
The,
So the black sort of dotted line, I'm just trying to understand, because one of the issues about the driveway might be ameliorated by pushing the house a little bit further back on the lot.
it is going to go further back. This was, we've been going back and forth with the architects And that was one of the first things that I discussed with them when they brought this to me, because part of the main issue is going forward, not just to address the driveway, but, you know, our intention is to make it fit as well as possible within the existing space. And when you're actually there and look at it, pushing it back will allow better sight lines for everybody and avoid more of kind of a cramped, you know, look. So that driveway issue, I think, will more than be addressed.
And that would be at the zoning permit
Correct.
stage
Yeah, that's much
versus
later,
the final,
but just,
right?
yeah.
Right. I think it's just, and I understand that you're not proposing a house or specific development, but I think illustrating that often is a way of
Sure.
meeting these concerns, because, you know, obviously driveways are a necessity, and likely in a house like this to have more than one car. And while, you know, we don't have to permit, I mean, we don't have a requirement to show more than one car, showing that adequate space is helpful. Okay, so was there any sort of initial direction you wanted to show us for this two-lot subdivision?
No, I think it was pretty self-explanatory as far as, you know, the sizing issue, trying to get them relatively even, because you want everything to fit as well as possible within the existing community, you know, without it, you know, with it, avoiding any major issues for anybody in the surrounding area, so.
So let me jump then to some of the questions that the staff has raised that I think are relevant. One is, we've talked about the driveway. The utilities, will those be underground?
If that's a requirement of the, I mean, I'm more than willing to meet any potential requirement that's proposed, obviously.
I'm trying to remember, Meredith, is that on this
Yeah.
street, underground utilities?
Just in subdivisions in general,
Okay.
new subdivisions, the request is that utilities be underground, because we're trying not to add. So that, I mean, if there's a line, you'd wanna go underground probably from the nearest place that you're already,
Underground from the street to the
yeah,
house.
underground from the street to the house.
Okay.
If there's already a line at the street. I
Okay.
just, I haven't driven down here with that in mind.
Okay. Well, again, that's, if that's something you're amenable to.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what it takes, I'm sure there's a way, I'm
Sure.
sure there's a way to get it done.
It's,
'Cause I know I can-
It's a requirement, it's like they
Yeah.
shall be located underground unless
Yeah.
prevented by ledge or other physical conditions.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's just on a regular street, I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a way just to, although the poles are on the other side, I'm just thinking of it now, cause the one runs to the existing house and then runs to the neighbor on the other side. It would have to be,
It would be helpful before your final subdivision is just to maybe inquire, I'm not looking for a commitment or anything like that, but it's helpful to us as we're making this decision if there is an impediment or something that would limit, to raise that now, just so we know that that is a restriction. You either can or cannot meet it, and that's helpful. So I would look a little bit closer, you know, and I don't know if that's a matter of talking to if you've hired an architect or an
Yeah,
engineer,
yeah.
to have them have that conversation, or they may be able to direct you to the utility company who would be able, because really what we're talking about is, you know, your electric and your phone and cable. I mean, those are what run off of the utility lines. I presume you'll have either a propane or oil system for heating, so it's not as if it's running off the street. It would be, this is served by city sewer and water, but that's already underground. Except for those of us who have fountains.
yeah, the only issue I can see is that the poles are on the other side of the street, so I'm sure there's some
Right.
I'm not sure how that would work going
Well,
around underneath.
How is the existing house served?
From across the,
So the wire comes across the street?
Correct, yeah.
Above this, above the
Mhm.
street. So the question is, can it be run off of, what, and that's I think that's an important question, in part because these are relatively new, these requirements for
Mhm.
running underground utilities. So it's helpful for us to understand. It's not as if 6 other lots on your street have done this and have all run it
Correct.
underground. Sorry, you're the canary in the coal mine.
yeah.
But it may
well,
also be, coming down to our office to have a little discussion and bringing Department of Public Works into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to make sure that, you know where all the potential, sewer and water connections are for the new lot as well as the
Mhm.
electric and, you and I can walk through some of this together because a lot of times for subdivisions, I've been lucky enough to have engineers on board and so they just give me this lovely survey with everything already on it.
Mhm.
I don't have to go and help the applicant find it, but
Okay, well,
I'm happy to
will
help
do.
you with that one too.
So one, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what's the area of the existing lot and what are the 2 proposed lots?
The existing now, well, it was previously, I actually just finished a survey, so some of the numbers will change, but the existing now is 15,438.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
So the proposed, there's one that'll be 6,400 approximately, and then lot 2 will be approximately 9,000.
9,000, yeah.
And I would just observe, as we're all getting to know the new zoning regulations, that the new minimum lot size in this area is 3,000 square
Mhm.
feet. So the new lot
That's
is
pretty
2
tight.
lots,
Yeah.
according to the zoning.
And it's actually slightly bigger when it comes to the next application.
Yeah.
Some of those numbers are gonna change and they're
Yeah.
gonna get
So
slightly
more than
larger,
enough.
so.
Okay. All right. Covered the driveway. The one thing that the staff has noted is that there's a chapter 350 subdivision standards, and these really are the sections about capacity of community facilities and utilities. It says the applicant shall demonstrate that the proposed subdivision shall not cause disproportionate or unreasonable burden on the city's ability to provide community facilities and utilities, including local schools, police, fire protection, ambulance service, street infrastructure and maintenance, park and recreation facilities, water supply, sewage disposal, stormwater systems, infrastructure, solid waste disposal, services and facilities. And then it has other sections such as suitability of the land, traffic, design, configuration, and parcel boundaries. These are just things that I think your application is going to have to touch upon just to answer, or be prepared to testify to why they don't. I mean, I can say that capacity, community facilities I just listed off. I list them off because I don't think this application touches upon any of those. It's an infill, it's existing within the city limits, it's in a tighter urban area. It's not going to, you're not gonna bring in 300 kids that will change how the school functions. You're not forcing police to go in an area where they don't usually patrol or fire for that sake. There's no park, or it's not gonna impinge upon the gateway to a park area, those kind of things. But just having those answers, and there's a number of sections in here, so that just take a look, and I think a brief narrative, Meredith can certainly help you address those, but we'll obviously be looking at those as we go into the final subdivision.
If I may add, by brief narrative, sometimes people will just take this list of what's in chapter 350 subdivision standards, and for each of the standards, sort of list the standard and how you met it. So it can really just be
Okay.
that simple,
Yeah,
typed up for us to review.
We
and
have
use.
some templates.
Oh, great. We have templates.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then one of the last, there's a few more, but the existing mature trees on the lot, whether or not your proposed development is going to affect those trees, and you may want to provide information about potential privacy or screening. This is one of the rare flat open areas in Montpelier where you don't have a cliff providing natural screening, such as the last applicant. So certainly how you, understanding that you don't have to propose actual landscaping, but addressing, it would be helpful to identify what the trees are, or, you know, where the sort of landscaping exists currently, as well as identifying areas where such screening could exist to prevent, you know, suddenly, I'll use as an example, that worked on a house once when I was a landscaper that just sat out like a big open house in a farm field with no landscaping anywhere near it. And I think we try to avoid that because we don't want that kind of sore thumb architecture. We want it to sort of blend into the neighborhood, and this is an existing neighborhood with mature trees and transitions between, and that's really what we talked about in the last applicant, is, you know, making sure that the landscaping helps those transitions. So identifying those areas will be helpful.
Just one quick thing, that tree in this picture no longer exists. I don't know when this picture was taken, and I just got here last summer, and I've never seen it, so I don't know at what point it was taken out, but the grass has grown over, so
It's been a while.
I don't know,
Well,
but that one
this
is no longer there.
This is just a Google Maps image. I don't have time to drive around to every single house we get an applicant
Yeah,
for
no,
and
I'm
take
just
actual
pointing it
pictures,
out,
so
so
thank you,
it's,
no,
you know,
thank you.
Yeah,
There's
So I-
two, there's one here, and then you'll see on some of the drawings, there's one major one, that's actually the boundary line on the other house.
Right.
And that one's staying, obviously, but.
And I think that's just what, I don't feel a need to necessarily get into at this point, a lengthy discussion about the landscaping, but I think for the final, just
Correct,
to have
yeah.
that indication,
Yep,
so that,
understood.
and I think that obviously, you know, frankly, a lot of these things help neighbors understand too, how this house is gonna look, you know, as infill. Is it going to disrupt what's an existing sort of flow between the houses, or is it going to fit in as the zoning regulations intend this type of infill to, which is to be of a piece so that when somebody moves in, like you did, they won't say, well, where'd that house come from, or, you know.
Understood.
I just want to note there is something that in editing I failed to put in red, top of page 13. When we're considering the renewable energy and energy conservation issues, there is a requirement that you not be impinging on, generally it says, with appropriate protections for each lot's solar access within the subdivision. Because I know this might have been an issue, I kind of went a little step further, in that on page 13, if you look and considering the way everything is oriented, a new house in between 19 Pearl Street and 27 Pearl Street could potentially have some solar impacts on the neighbor on 27 Pearl Street. That picture is shown with the north-south vertical orientation. So, just something to think about, even though I know it's not the lot within the, quote, within the subdivision. I think our current subdivision regulations are really written for larger multi-lot subdivisions, not two-lot subdivisions, infill.
Yep. I would agree with that.
So, in that case, this calls for appropriate protections for each lot, solar access, and appropriateness may take into consideration the fact that it's infill in an
Yep.
existing neighborhood.
But it's something for you guys to consider when the regulations don't quite necessarily apply to this situation.
Oh, I'm saying that they could be.
Yep, you'll need to interpret
Appropriate
them
protections
with that
would
way.
be interpretable
Right.
in this context, yeah.
Right. But definitely something for you to interpret, not me.
Yep. Well, I'm always happy to interpret. Okay. Do you have any questions about that? I mean, you know,
No.
part of it is, if you think about like light trespass, you know, you can't build big imposing structure that casts a giant shadow on 27 Pearl Street.
Understood.
And I think that's very similar to the way in which the solar, you know, because if a solar array is on a roof and you build something that's gonna
Understood.
overshadow, but at the same time, you know, part of this is just, and again, I think this is where, you know, if there's concerns raised, shifting building back and forth, you, it seems, I think you have some play in where the proposed house
Yeah,
could be.
We would do.
Okay. And then I think the only other staff comment was really about whether or not there was a survey of the existing parcel, and did you say that there was a survey? Okay, great.
Fresh off the presses.
Excellent. So I think that, that will take care of that issue. But moving away from the staff report, are there any questions from other board members as to concerns about this two-lot subdivision? Any questions?
Well, I just, we had a discussion about the utilities and that underground, and that maybe something that could be identified on the plat is what sort of rights exist, you know, if any, for utilities access to the parcel, if that's determined that, or, you know.
Well, that's actually a great point, and I think that wasn't expressly said, but I'm glad it was, which is, you know, obviously that impacts how these two parcels relate if there's a need for utility easement across parcel. What you're describing as lot 2, which is the existing house, to benefit lot 1. You know, that's one way to, that will be helpful to identify that, whether there's going to be a need for one, because if there is, we don't scrutinize the language of the easement, but we do require it, and we require it to a certain satisfaction so that we can review and approve it.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions? Any questions from the public, or comments, or feedback? Great. So, from here, we don't take a vote or make any decisions. You've gotten some feedback from us, and really, I would characterize it in terms of just more detail, and addressing some of these looser issues. I'm not seeing any setback issues or boundary or size issues.
Yeah, some of that was, you know, some of the further details were, you had to wait for the surveys,
Sure.
you know, and go forward with the architects and so on. I think
Any questions for us as a board?
not at this time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next applicants, please come forward. Come on down. That's what Roddy used to say. Price is Right. He was the announcer on The Price is Right. No, he was the host.
Isn't it still the same guy?
I think Roddy may have done it. Or retired. Yeah. Neither being ill or, yeah,
What's that?
or unemployed, I have not watched The Price is Right in a long
It sure isn't.
Last 2 weeks.
time. Yeah.
A couple times.
Do
Doing everything.
Still
Drew
pretty
Carey,
amazing.
Drew Carey really, you know.
He does.
He's picked up the mantle.
He has
well.
does he have the long, thin
He sure
microphone?
does, yeah.
The Bob Barker microphone?
Yeah, he does.
Excellent. All right, please introduce yourselves.
Matt Wamsgans from Global Partners.
And Jeff Oleski with Catamount Consulting Engineers.
Great. So raise your right hands. We're going to put you under oath. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Very good. Actually, I'm going to have you guys just jump right into it. I think that's,
Yeah, you guys are all,
yeah.
yeah.
Lead us down the path, Jeff.
Yeah. So very similar application we've submitted to the 367 River Street project with Connors last month, in that we've got a previously approved site plan development for a new gas station that was approved in 16 or 17, and where essentially the property's been bought out by a new ownership group, and they're just looking to make some very minor renovations to the approved plan. as such, in our discussions with staff, we've made this application and attempting to permit this amendment to the previous permit. So we're back to a situation where we're still reviewing under the old regulations. So all the plans, the development plans that are presented to the board still relate to those zoning requirements. So if it pleases the board, I'm happy to provide a brief rundown of the changes that we've done since the previous approval, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So similar to what we've done, we've taken the proposed site plan, and again, we're talking about the existing Curly fuel gas service station on Route 2,
And
366, I think East Montpelier Road.
sorry, Jeff,
Yeah.
just so we understand, this is, you have sheet number C2,
I do, I have C2.
and that's the one with bubbles again that show us.
Exactly, it's
So
kind of a-
C 2.0, the Rev 4 with the small date 1919, that has your parking, your 1919 revision references with the bubbles around the different changes that they're making. This is gonna be the one you're probably gonna wanna refer to through most of this.
Right.
I've included everything, but this is the one that really helps.
Right, so similar to before, we've provided the existing conditions plan as the site still operates now. We provided the proposed condition site plan, and then we've also done the proposed site plan with these revisions to kind of annotate what the changes were that we're proposing. But I do have a full plan set here if anybody wants to look at the existing conditions.
I also brought another big one.
Yeah, so, I think everybody's probably familiar with the property right now. There's,
Right.
3 structures there now. There's a small gas station with a canopy. There's the kind of mixed use, so right now, in the middle, there's kind of the existing canopy that's along the frontage. There's a mixed use office building, on the south side of the property. And there's that kind of large storage, barn in the back of the property now. And, as previous before, the design plans call for the removal of everything essentially and reconstruction with a new proposed gas service station building, convenience store, small deli inside, and then canopy located to the north of the proposed building. The building footprint and location have not changed at all. The general overall access, flow, the majority of the utilities have not changed. So the changes, I think, are relatively minor and more utility oriented than anything. But again, I'll just run through them really quick. I think the primary one, or the biggest change, is probably the one that may get discussed the most tonight, is we've relocated the fuel pumps and canopy. I'm not sure who here on the board was part of that original review and process, but right now there's an existing canopy. So this being the front property line or the right-of-way line, and back in 2011 regulations, there was a 50-foot front yard requirement. So this setback line here actually bifurcates a large portion of the existing canopy out there right now. So that the whole existing canopy was more or less non-conforming. As part of that review process back then, essentially it was determined that we could not remove that canopy and rebuild it, even if we were making it less non-conforming, and that we actually had to just maintain it or truncate it and add on to the back end of it in order for it to be allowed to be grandfathered in, so to speak. And based on conversations with staff and the desires of the new ownership of the property, that existing canopy structure is just unsalvageable, financially unreasonable, it's just not good practice to build something that's kind of falling down anyway. So what we're proposing now is the removal of that canopy, and then the new canopy to be built substantially further back, and I'm guessing we're talking maybe another 15 to 20 feet further back from the property line, although it still would not fully comply with the old zoning regulations, in that the new canopy would still stick out into the front yard setback. I believe staff did note or comment, though, that the new front yard setback for the zoning district, for what that's worth, it would comply. I think it's a 20 or 30-foot front yard setback now, so if we were looking at today's zoning regulations, it would comply. So we just shifted this back and reconfigured the pumps, and we weren't bound by needing to work off of the existing stanchions and structural layout of that canopy, and it just freed us up to use the space more effectively and efficiently. The second change was just the relocation of the underground fuel storage tanks. We shifted these to the north and kind of get them out of the majority of the driving course of the general public that'll be using both the standard canopy and the parking along the building frontages. Change 3 involved the relocation. We had 3 landscaping, new deciduous trees planned along the north property line here, and to accommodate both the new underground storage tanks and still provide what we thought was a requisite amount of snow storage. We've just shifted these a little bit in location, same number, same area of the property, just shifted. Same thing with the dumpster enclosure. And we can talk a little bit more about this, because I think there was a staff comment on it, but this still fenced trash recycling enclosure was just a little further shifted to the north on previous design plans. Understanding that the proposed traffic pattern, they'll still have 2 curb cuts, but we're narrowing up the southern curb cut pretty substantially and making this an entrance only. So that large trucks, delivery trucks, tractor trailers, the traffic pattern is really going to be to come in on the southern access, go to the back of the building, and then loop around the front, deliver the gas, and then exit. And all traffic from the site, regardless of where it comes in, will exit on the north curb cut. To make this turning movement a little more functional, we just wanted to get as much room there as we could, so we shifted it 5 or 10 feet. There was previously, as part of the proposed building here, the previous owners were gonna maybe do some second floor office space, I believe, as part of the building layout, and that use has been removed from the proposed design now. This will strictly just be a gas service station with a deli. As such, we've just updated the parking and design flows associated with the water and sewer and things of that nature, and that's kind of reflected in the summary down in the bottom left corner. So that was the next 2 revisions, 5 and 6. Revision 7, at the new owner's request, we've added a few more exterior light poles and light fixtures. We didn't have much on the site plan previously beyond the building mounted lights and the canopy. We just thought, given the space along the back and the perimeter and some of the parking areas, some additional exterior lighting would be necessary. Still all LED, downcast, shielded cutoff fixtures. And then the other couple are very minor, just utilities, just where the underground electric and water come into the building based on the new current design, building footprint, light, and mechanical location. We've just had to change the utility sizes and location to accommodate that. I think in general, that's a quick rundown of the changes we're proposing, so I'll hand it over to the board of questions, or we can go through some of the staff comments as well.
Sure. Any initial questions off the top of the lineup? All right. So I think let's dig into the real, well, not the real, but the first issue, which is the canopy within the setback. How far within the setback is the canopy still going to be?
Can you scale?
I've got one in my bag.
Yeah.
So as proposed, it's probably about 15 to 18 feet into the front setback of required 50. And
At its furthest point,
at
it's
its
like a
furthest point,
triangle of it.
yeah, it's kind of this triangle right here. So here's the setback line, and so at its farthest point, currently, currently, we're talking, 35 feet or so of encroachment, this again being the setback, and then this dashed line being the approximate existing canopy. So we'd
And
be-
that's about where the permit approved before.
Correct, so before, they didn't wanna lose this, shifting the canopy all the way to the back was gonna make just given the way the right-of-way sits here with a 50-foot setback, it was gonna make a big chunk of that parking area unusable. And so what we did is we had to maintain some component of this, so we actually held this corner, and we just, instead of going 3 by 2, we wanted because as far as layout of fuel pumps, you don't like having 3 in a row because then you're always got one in the middle you're trying to parallel park into or get to.
Right.
So all we were doing before on the originally approved plans where we were just lopping off the far south end of the canopy and maintaining the 2x and then just extending it further. So now we've got, still have the 2x configuration, we've just pushed the whole thing further to the south, or west rather.
And can I ask, when you say 2x, you're meaning 2 here, 2 here, 2 here?
Yeah,
So that
exactly.
means people are gonna drive in here and then make their way across the front where people are parking and kind of in like this and then out like that?
Correct, or they'll be able to enter on the north as well.
Okay.
So the north curb cut will be a traditional kind of 2-way
I
curb
see.
cut.
Yeah.
We lobbied to have this maintained as a 2-way, but in our, essentially our discussions with Public Works as part of that first process,
Yeah.
understanding we're very close to an existing driveway here, the compromise, I guess I'll say, was made was to maintain, to narrow this down to an entrance only.
Okay.
So there'll be signage here, do not enter signs and whatnot.
Right.
I'm just trying to envision the internal circulation of the site if you've come in here and then you need to
Yeah.
exit out here.
I would imagine, most people are probably gonna be coming in here, just getting gas and then looping back out. Or coming in if they don't need gas and just parking in, we've got 10 spaces here, 5 and 3. And that actually reminds me of one other staff comment was the discrepancy in the parking spaces. And you're accurate in that the number here needs to read 32 and not 30. So that's an update we need to make.
Okay. So the circulation is gonna be really similar to the barn in Randolph.
Yes. Yep, I'm just trying to picture it in my head.
Thanks, I just had to figure out how the site was gonna work. Thank you.
So as far as looking at we've already approved the fuel canopy that was further into the right-of-way, but that was really if I'm remembering correctly, that was just essentially allowing a grandfather. We were proposing to keep the old canopy, whereas now that's gonna be removed. This is a brand-new canopy entirely.
Yes.
What's the pleasure of the board on that canopy issue as far as question?
Because it doesn't
Yes.
quite work with the non-conforming,
Well, we also don't
nonconformity
have
issue
the
we had
new-
before.
We also don't have
Yeah, the new regs.
The new regs.
Right,
I mean,
and this is, it's a bit of a conundrum because it ends up with a much better design.
Well, plus it's, under the old regs, it specifically said you could only reconstruct if it was damaged by fire, flood, explosion, or other casualty. I don't think there was any testimony that the old canopy met any of those, so it's not clear to me that how it was granted to reconstruct a larger existing canopy under the old regs in the first instance.
no, we weren't, the old regs, and I don't know if anyone else was on this application before, other than Kevin and I. But my recollection was it was just keeping the old canopy.
I believe the argument previously was that, as long as the structural supports were maintained, we were making an existing grandfathered nonconformity less nonconforming by removing a portion that was within the setback.
Right.
That was, I believe, how it was justified, or whatever language you want to use
Okay.
previously.
I mean, this is the old, so keeping in mind that if they were to apply fresh today, they would be allowed to do what they're doing without any limitations. So when we talk about non-conforming, we're really only talking about sort of procedural hiccup where we have an existing permit, shouldn't have to necessarily redo the entire permit, but the old bylaws aren't as generous as the new bylaws. But to the extent that there's an issue created, it's one that dissipates, given that in the future, it's the new bylaws that would.
Was reapplication under the 2018 regs contemplated?
It was contemplated, I guess it was in discussions with staff, this appeared to be the path of least resistance, I'd say, given the minor scope of the change that we're looking
Sure, because what we're reviewing is only the
Right.
delta, like,
Yeah.
only the things
And
that
because
are.
of the flux with the new regulations and all the changes happening with them.
We didn't want to invest a lot in landscaping.
And I think there were also some questions about them needing to apply for a new floodplain application for potentially the whole site as well, that had already been approved previously.
Yeah, so we have to pick one or the other.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
there's no saying that they can't then reapply under the new regs if
Right.
they have problems here, but
Sure.
this seemed like, even though I know we have the canopy problem, it seemed like potentially the best way to go forward.
This is still gonna result in less canopy within the setback than was previously approved.
Exactly.
By a fair amount, yeah.
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 By quite a lot.
And again, I realize it's the current regulations don't mean anything, but the current canopy wouldn't comply with the current regulations, whereas this proposed canopy would.
The other conundrum we found ourselves in was so the company I work for bought this project as approved by the Curly's got the project and Jeff got it approved, so when we came on board, we started looking at it and we were like, they got approval to keep a portion of a canopy, which you can't really do that because a canopy, each individual canopy is designed by a structural engineer as that structure. So when you try to keep this corner up here and these two columns, and then try to tack on more, you're gonna have a hard time finding a structural engineer that's going to wanna do that. You know, and they're all gonna say, no, you can't do that, you can't, it's impossible. So what got approved was almost not workable
Constructible.
in that sense. So that's when we started digging deeper and went, uh-oh, we can't, doesn't work very well.
What's the pleasure of the board? And it may be just simply the hour that we're at this evening. My sense is this, is that the non-conforming structure reconstruction, we're not really talking about a reconstruction, because it's that's really intended for damage by fire, flood, explosion, or other casualty. At the same time, it's not the same type of non-conformity that was envisioned by the old bylaws, which is to say, something that the bylaws have moved forward. And I understand we can't sort of toggle back and forth between new bylaws and old bylaws. At the same time, it seems ridiculous to ignore the reality on the ground as to what we have today for our regulations governing this. So I'm comfortable seeing this as not necessarily a reconstruction, but as essentially a continuation of the nonconformity in a manner that makes sense given the structural limitations of the existing, what was approved originally back in 2016, and the structural realities of this particular canopy system, which is you can't have a canopy that you cut in half or tack on to. It has to be, to allow the canopy to survive, as we've already permitted, we have to look at the nonconformity in a larger sense. And in this respect, given that these are the older bylaws, that if they were to come today, sort of at blank page, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I think that the old bylaws have that flexibility because they weren't as complex or as laid out as the current ones are. So the idea of keeping a nonconformity or having, this is really a technical problem
less than, letting reconstructing a nonconformity, because nothing's happened to it. But the reality is that we've permitted and allowed this, and that means, in some ways, rebuilding it.
We're obligated to act in a way that makes sense, and I
Right.
think you've just put that in the proper context. And as we're transitioning from the old to the new regulations, we're gonna have to continue to be light on our feet for the time being.
Right.
And be able to address it from these two perspectives. So I agree with your reasoning.
Good. And you all comfortable with that?
Mr. Chair, are you saying that
Yep.
because we've permitted it and allowed a larger structure, assuming it was an existing structure, it would now be irrational to say that a smaller structure that is less non-conforming, even though it's built anew, should not be permitted? We're talking about this as though we have approved a footprint, and you're saying it's a technicality as to whether that footprint is for something that is existing versus something that is being built anew.
Yes. I think the footprint in this respect is the apt concept.
And we're trying to discuss or conclude perhaps that it would be irrational to not allow that footprint just because something is being built anew.
Right, it's a
Exactly.
proposed amendment to the footprint, which will decrease the amount of nonconformity.
Yeah, we're already getting a benefit because the original permit talked about reducing the footprint. And now there's been an additional reduction. But that comes with the idea that the materials to be used are not reducing the existing materials, because to have any cut down in the footprint, there has to be an entirely new
Right.
structure.
Right.
Well, and just another way to look at this, that I'm not sure if it's necessarily case law oriented, but that what we're looking to amend is the prior permit. So the starting point is the prior permit and what was previously approved. So in a sense, that previously approved footprint is a non-conforming structure, not what's actually there right this second. Potentially, is one way to look at it.
I mean, I remember going around about this. Jeff, were you on the earlier one?
I was, yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I think we had a little bit, this is the same sort of pull and push we had.
We did. Extensively.
Yeah. These old permits never fade away.
Eventually, please.
But,
Meredith's waiting for the day that she
yeah.
doesn't have to.
But
review
But I think that's what's important to me is that
Yeah.
the prior board did all that push and pull and said, we're gonna allow this canopy to exist in this footprint in the setback, and now they're proposing to amend that approval for a decreased level of
Yep.
nonconformity. So I'm with you that it doesn't make any sense to deny that, under the regulations that previously allowed it,
Right.
the bigger one.
Right, and the fact of the matter is that if they choose to get a new permit going forward, they already start out as a conforming structure, so.
I think I'm comfortable with where we have landed on this because it's fair. And I look forward to not having more of these overlapping ones. I'm sure staff does as well. But I'd just like us to note for ourselves that this is something we're doing because of an exceptional situation, and these types of rationale or contortions in the future, not for you, just in general, are something we would want to be cautious of.
Right, and I think they're,
I think that goes without saying, but
Agreed.
one
Yeah.
say.
no, but it's so the applicants who've gotten a permit under the old don't have to either go and redo completely anew or get stuck in some sort of limbo.
Right. I know why we're doing it now, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in terms of the type of logic that we're applying, I just want to make sure it is being applied because of to avoid limbo.
All right, so let's talk about the garbage enclosure. You're proposing,
the same type of fenced-in enclosure for the dumpsters?
Yeah, the fencing detail hasn't changed, we've just shifted it, like I said, 5 to 10 feet closer to the south to provide more turning radius in the back.
Right. And is this still outside the setback, or is this?
It's I don't know if it constitutes a structure per se, a fenced-in area. There's not gonna be a shed or anything, it's literally just a fenced-in area for them to put the trash recycling enclosures. But it was previously within the setback, and it's still within the setback. One thing I did bring along with me, it was pointed out in the staff notes that one of the conditions of approval previously was that the applicant was to provide letters of support for the project and maybe specifically the enclosure to both the property owner to the west and south. And I actually have copies of both of those letters that we were able to locate, and I'll provide, if you're willing to take them now. But they're letters from Casella, which is the property owner to the west, as well as Chuck and Paul Haynes. Paul Haynes actually in the audience tonight. Just more or less, both of those letters pretty much just say that they're in general support of the project as approved and presented previously. Unfortunately, they don't call out the enclosure specifically, but I thought those might be helpful in the board's assessment of us complying with that condition at least previously.
Well, the Haynes do call out the trash enclosure.
Oh, they do, there you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
actually, both of them do. Just so I'm sorry, it's just the lateness of the hour. How far further back have you put the trash from the original permit?
So put it this way, the shaded box here is the concrete pad, the enclosure,
Yep.
and the fence would go around it. That box was always within the bubble.
Okay.
So, where it wasn't like way over here, it was just from, we just
Shifted
slid
it.
Again, I don't,
It's just a couple of feet.
yeah,
Okay,
five
just a couple of
feet or something.
It's not that bad, it's just, the big issue I had was that I couldn't find the letters to
Okay.
that condition. And that's one of the
Yep.
things that's required if that's within the setback area. So now I
Okay,
have those.
now you have the letters.
Yep.
And Mr. Haynes, have you been appraised of the change in the garbage location?
I wasn't aware of it.
Okay.
I don't see any issue with it. I mean, I feel that the letter from previously still.
Maintained.
We're fine with that,
Okay.
yeah.
And it would be a great irony if Casella had an issue.
Well,
Couldn't just throw it over the fence.
To throw over the fence, I don't know if we can require that. Okay.
But are you gonna move it, the Casella is the,
They're here.
yeah, so it's not moving any closer to their property line.
just slid. Oops.
So the proposed underground storage tanks, new tanks, those are permitted to be within the 20-foot setback?
Yeah,
Yeah, the underground storage tanks, yeah.
yep, those can be there. And it's actually, I think they're in a better location there than they were up front.
The reason we moved them, just so you know, is they were located under the canopy, and if you've been to, everyone's been to gas stations, you don't want to drive over those things. We don't want you to drive over those things all the time. And they're usually humped up pretty good to shed water, and they were all laid under the canopy, which is just not a good position for them. Plus, when the tanker comes to deliver fuel, he completely blocks everybody off from using them, so he can instead come in and go right over where they are and keep the fuel pumps open.
Right.
Sorry, when I was talking about front, I was thinking about the first proposed revision you brought.
Yeah.
Apologies.
And just so I have a larger overall sense, the building is just gonna be a convenience store at this point. So it's gonna look like the traditional gas station layout, canopy pumps, setback, convenience store.
Yes.
No office buildings, no.
Nope.
It's just
One story.
One story.
They are proposing a small deli inside with 2 seats.
But did you, convenience store?
Yeah.
I mean, not unlike any of the other convenience stores that shall not be named at this evening meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. So one concern about so the red maples have shifted. And how far off are they from sort of the sight line from before, from Route 2? If you're heading east on Route 2,
So, again, I don't have, let me see if I have the previously approved.
Here's the previously approved.
Oh,
You have a
here's the
second
previous.
C 2.0
Yep.
in there?
thanks.
Yep. So, I think that was, I think we called, might have been it.
Oh, maybe it was.
C 2.0. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
there you
So-
go.
So here's
That's
the
the
previous
original
one.
approval.
This is the originally approved one. So essentially, we've just taken these 3 trees, this one was very close to property line to begin with. And we've just brought them a little closer together and shifted them, to this location.
Right.
So this one may be moved down. I think the biggest impact is this one moving down maybe 15, 20 feet.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, but part of the reason for those trees there were to create some visual breakup of that. Now, I understand that if you're moving the underground storage tanks, then you don't want to put a tree where it's going to die. But I'm wondering if there shouldn't be some other sort of landscaping there to visually break up. Just because that is closer to the road as people come see it.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously can't speak for Matt or the owner. I mean, we could certainly investigate doing something here. I think the only reason we didn't want anything, obviously it's a relatively built-out site. There's not a lot of room for snow storage, given the lack of room on the back property line. So this kind of triangular piece of area is probably constitute a significant amount of the snow storage. And understanding that any type of planting or small shrub probably won't survive there very well, which was the intent to make this location of 3 of the larger deciduous trees and then get them as far back to provide them as much opportunity to, survive long-term. There is quite a bit of bushes and shrubs going along on the front of the area here, as well as a couple more trees in the back, and then there's kind of landscaped grasses and shrubs between the building and parking. But if there's an interest in maybe supplementing with some bushes along the property line, I don't think it would be a problem necessarily.
So the plan is to have the snow storage, but those are gonna be, the snow storage is gonna be behind the fuel tanks in that back
Yes.
corner there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not really concerned, especially if you're putting those trees there. I'm not looking for any more plantings there. I'm thinking just more where the tree would have been located. So if there's any type of like shrub and berm type,
This starts to get a little outside my area of expertise here, but if the point is to lessen the visual impact for someone traveling like this, there seems to be an existing tree maybe on the neighboring parcel. Would it make sense to put one?
is Agway the immediate neighbor to the west?
North, yes, I believe this
Is
is
that north?
Agway here.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
one thing to keep in mind with this whole thing, and I'm just recalling it now because it's been so long since I've looked at this, but if you see this dashed line here that kind of goes around this tree, it encroaches quite a ways onto the adjacent property. Right now, that is all existing gravel parking lot that is kind of an encumbrance on this. There's actually a strip of property here that's the old railroad bed right away.
And that's still a right of way.
And that's still a right of way, but as part of, and we actually located some train tracks as part of the survey you can see here. But a part of that original plan is we're reclaiming all of this and turning it from gravel to grassed landscaping essentially as an additional benefit to just reducing the footprint. I think the only potential issue is we just between the property line and our pavement, we get very narrow there.
Okay.
So-
And I didn't realize how little space there was, so I think I planted
Yeah.
a tree on your neighbor's property, which I'm not supposed to do. So thanks for walking me through that.
No, and that actually, if we're talking about Agway, I mean, they already have that fencing line too, so it's not the visual
Yeah, it's another
issue
commercial
that-
use, and I think their parking lot, we picked up some edge of pavement, kind of comes to, you know,
Right.
right up into that area as well. Yeah.
Okay,
That satisfies my curiosity.
thanks. Any other landscaping questions or issues? I think that the answer about the relocation of the fuel tanks and storage tanks, I'm satisfied with that unless anybody wants to dig deeper than that. And we've gotten confirmation on the parking spaces that it's 32.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
And that's what's shown on the plan, it's just that we need to, somewhere in the translation, the parking summary that did not get updated appropriately, so we'll make that correction.
Somebody needs to get on the ball.
Someone dropped it.
All right, so what's the pleasure of the board?
Would you want to adjourn to deliberative session?
If that's the pleasure of the board.
I throw that out there. I'm not convinced that's necessary,
I'm not feeling it's necessary. I think it's a pretty straightforward amendment. And I don't feel like we're putting on any particular conditions. I mean, it took a little while to walk
Work our way
through.
through the
And this may be
connection.
something where the final written decision should be circulated
yes.
Yeah.
a little bit wider.
That's really what I was thinking, more than deliberative session for the sake
Okay.
of deliberative session.
Well, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just probably the conditions 1 and 3.
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve the amended site plan at 366 East Montpelier Road as presented in the application and supporting materials, subject to the conditions that this approval does not result in the issuance of a new permit, and so any expiration dates of the original permit are not affected by this approval. And additionally, that all prior conditions of previous DRB approvals remain in full force and effect for the property.
Motion by Ryan. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Rob. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please raise your right hand. All right, so there's approval, and as I said before, we'll write up a decision. We have to do that within 45 days. And no, actually, we don't, because we've already voted to approve it.
No, you still have to.
No, there's actually some case law on that. Anyway, we aim to please to get that out. That then starts the clock ticking for the 30-day appeal period on any amendment, but nothing further at this point.
Because we have to have our building in by September 15th, so.
Yeah.
The building will be substantially complete.
Substantially complete.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a case law that when you, well,
Let's,
okay, so,
After.
yeah.
yeah.
All right, I will simply note that our next regularly scheduled meeting is Monday, March 4th, 2019, back to the Mondays.
And we
Yeah.
will be here because there is an application.
We will start at 7 PM.
Mr. Chair, I would like to know, I will be absent from that meeting.
Duly noted. So we will, and I'll be sending out an email to the board just to remind everyone that if you are not going to be here, let us know as soon as possible. I think we have 5 out of 7, and that's, I think we are a capable board, but obviously we do better when we have 7. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Motion by Kevin, second?
Second.
Second by Kate. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much and good night.
And good night. Good luck and good night.
So there is case law, if you look under some of the deemed approved cases, when, and I don't know the exact site, but I do know that when a board votes to approve.
It's so weird, yeah, I don't know.
Votes on a public application, the fact that the
It
written
seems like there's gotta be
decision outside of the
I mean,
45-day
there was,
window
okay,
does not create
yeah,
some
place in like a two-story structure with like a.
In fact, the only time I've really seen a deemed
And it was
approved
interesting
situation
analysis.
arise
is where the
Yeah,
court has
it's-
found
it's-
this is in Wardtown.
Yeah, I think so
that
too.
The board.
Right, it doesn't make sense to say you
evidentiary
gotta
record just sort of
cut your
dangling.
deckhand off of your
And it
existing
doesn't
non-conforming
do,
property line
doesn't,
when you're
or
replacing.
closes the record and just sort of
Two
goes
sort of
into
structure.
endless deliberations.
Yeah.
So there's a
working out.
Moortown case on that deemed approved, but then if you look at the other deemed approved cases, and I think there's one out of Berlin, they've largely said that when the decision, the actual decision is made, within the 45 days, that stops